Welcome to the Produce Moms Podcast, where we believe there is a produce mom in all of us. I'm Lori Taylor, founder and CEO of the Produce Moms. For 10 years, I sold fresh produce to over 300 grocery stores in the U.S. And today, my team and I are fully focused on inspiring people to eat more fruits and vegetables. This show is just one of the ways that we hope to inspire you and your family to eat more produce and live a better life. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, join our community of almost 40,000 in all 50 states and over 30 countries by visiting theproducemoms.com/subscribe. And be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes. Thanks for being here. Enjoy today's show. Hey everybody, welcome back. Today is a special edition of the Produce Moms Podcast. I love coming to you every Wednesday, but I also love coming to you all and connecting with you outside of Wednesdays for these really fun and compelling stories that are timely in our industry or news that just kind of deserves a spotlight of its own. And that is what today's episode is all about. We are welcoming back this will now be her third episode on the Produce Moms Podcast. We are welcoming Wendy Reinhardt Kapsak. She is the president and CEO of the Produce for Better Health Foundation. You can scroll back in the archives and you can find her in episode 116, as well as episode 52. So she was on in 2019, 2020, and we are super thrilled to welcome her back in 2021. Today, we are going to be talking about, of course, the award-winning Have a Plant movement that Wendy has just been absolutely instrumental on. Episode 52 is where you can learn more about the kickoff of the Have a Plant movement. And of course, we're going to talk about it today as well. But PBH actually just concluded some compelling research and talking about America's fruit and vegetable consumption trends over the last several years. And we have an opportunity to improve. And that's what Wendy and I are going to talk about today. The data that PBH was able to put together for all of us so that we can make better decisions and how we inspire folks to eat more fruits and veggies. That's what it's all about. So Wendy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me back. This is my annual appearance, as you've mentioned.
We should work out a way where it's more than once a year. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for being back.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us about this new research. It's called State of the Plate, correct?
Yes. So every 5 years, the Produce for Better Health Foundation commissions the NPD Group. And in this research, what we're looking at is, as you mentioned, America's fruit and vegetable consumption trends, both in and away from home. And we're looking at this over an extended period of time. The first iteration of the State of the Plate was in, I believe it was 2005. I think we have data even going back to the early 2000s, like 2002. And what's really interesting is we get to see those trends over time. And given, all the amazing guests you have on your podcast, is we get to see also how innovation has, in some respects, maybe changed some consumer behavior.
Yeah,
but
for
then
sure.
then also where, we have room to both self-reflect and then maybe improve.
Yeah, I love that. And self-reflect, that really resonates with me because oh my gosh, like there are days where I'm like, oh, I didn't do my job right. It's obviously more than a lifestyle for me being, with considering my career. Right. But truthfully, anyone listening, like, oh my goodness, we are all in this together. Eating fruits and vegetables is something that we all need to do more of. So Wendy, let's dive into some of these statistics and help people understand where the research stands today. And maybe a little bit more, you mentioned it's 5 years. So what is the research?
So in the last 5 years, we've seen what I would call a gradual, and really over the full complement of the research, even dating back to 2005, is we've seen, and this is sad, but we're going to talk about all the bright spots too, a gradual erosion of fruit and vegetable consumption habits by consumers. So this is concerning because these habits, which in this research are measured by frequency, how often someone's consuming a fruit and or a vegetable, is this means that with less frequency, likely the habits themselves aren't forming early on, and they're not continuing on as we move through our life and various life stages. So a lot of times the research that we hear, we'll often hear 1 in 10 Americans is meeting the recommendations, meaning another 9 are not. And that research is based on volume data, meaning consumption data from the government that's measured in cups. And then this is noted with, let's say, what's the U.S. dietary guidelines for Americans, or as many consumers know at My Plate, make half your plate fruits and vegetables. Mm-hmm. And so this data is a great complement because, as I mentioned, it's really looking at the frequency, or how NPD captures it as annual eatings per year. And so what we see is that there has been a since we first started this research in the last a little bit more than a decade, is we've seen a near 10% decline in annual eatings per year by Americans. And so this is overall all age groups, et cetera. So,
and what do you consider the eatings? Like, what does it have to be, like a fresh fruit or vegetable, or is it, help folks understand exactly what the products are that qualify?
Yeah. So whenever anybody can go to the NPD group and they have this ongoing research. And so you then say, okay, here's what I want to know about what and how people are eating. And so, of course, we noted fruits and vegetables as being that. And then you go and you further define that. So, for example, PBH, and this is looking at fresh, frozen, canned, dried, and 100% juice. The rolled up number of a decline that I'm communicating with you today is collectively all of those forms. Now, we do have it pulled out to some degree by various forms as well. So there's I'm going to give you some general trends today, and there's some big differences. Let's say, right. For example, fruit appears to be winning a little bit in the snacking occasion, for example. And so we see a little uptick in there. Whereas vegetables, we see double-digit declines in their consumption, along with double-digit declines in juice consumption, for example. Mm-hmm. So, there's some real bright spots, but there's also some significant areas for improvement. I would say right. This research also was really different this go around, because in the past, PBH along with NPD tried to predict the future. And gosh, after a year like this one, we know that that's pretty impossible. Right. But so what we did was we took a step back and we said, well, let's take a look at this at a different angle. And let's really look at people or Americans who would be considered high frequency consumers. That 1 in 10 that's meeting those recommendations, they're pretty much, from a frequency perspective, they are eating fruits and or vegetables at every single meal and snack occasion. So it's like, we want to be like them. And so what are the behaviors and or attitudes of those consumers compared, for example, to those that might be considered more moderate and or very light consumers? And so what we find is that most Americans are in this light consumers category. They are eating fruits and or vegetables. They're eating vegetables maybe once a day and eating fruit even less. And so I know that seems like, oh my gosh, for real? Yes, for real. And so sometimes when you're immersed in a certain industry or certain type of product portfolio, it's really difficult to step back and say, okay, in the context of what everyone's eating, how often are they really eating these products and enjoying them? And then are they repeating that enjoyment through frequency of consumption? So these numbers can be a little disheartening when you think, gosh, fruits and vegetables, they're like kind of relegated to a side dish, and now they're like eroding, maybe even falling off the plate entirely. But there are things that we can learn from this if we choose to self-reflect and say, okay, clearly there's an opportunity to do something a little different.
Yeah. And, and I was surprised with the report. I thought, because, and again, I'm not privileged to being a research house or having access to working hand in hand with one outside of, obviously your organization. But I, just anecdotally speaking, it's like even the local pizza places here in Indianapolis, Indiana have cauliflower crust pizzas now. for delivery, it's like, and so that's, you wonder, like, I feel like fruits and vegetables are everywhere. Maybe it's because I'm so fruit and vegetable passionate. I don't know, but it's important that we have this research because data doesn't lie. Numbers don't lie. There's no anecdotal gray area with that. But it is important that we, pause, understand it, and figure out how can we modify it as we move forward. And anyone that's listening to the show that has a stakehold in the fresh produce industry, this is a great way to make informed decisions as we move forward.
Yeah. So I can share a couple of some tidbits with you, just kind of the overarching data, and then we can dig in based on what you think the audience will be most interested in. But just a few little notes. I mean, here's the good news. Fruits and vegetables have high household penetration. So when we look at, in the last decade, a top 10 list. And so what you see is fruits and vegetables are showing up in that list. Coffee's still number one. It's held its number one spot for like a long time now. But okay, so we're in good company. But what you see is a little bit of nuance. So in the last decade, juice, for example, has totally come off the top 10 list as one of those fruit and vegetable forms, if you will. So, and that's not surprising because there's been a lot of discussion from other health groups and authorities that have noted that, for example, the American Academy of Pediatrics or the American Dental Association, groups strongly discouraging juice consumption. And we see the lowest decline in juice consumption in young children. The shame of it is, though, and this is now from a communications or marketer's point of view, is that it's not like, oh, well, all of a sudden they've all just started eating fruit in a different form. That's not true. And so sometimes, juice, for example, 100% juice can be a great source of some of those nutrients, and it can add to that recommended amount of fruits and vegetables that, for example, young children can have in a day if done within the context of the guidelines. So we do need to be careful that we don't swing with our recommendations so far-fetched that now people aren't eating anything. So that's one thing that I found kind of interesting. When we look at fruit, we get to, there's some winners there. And there's an uptick, for example, in fruit consumption in both the side dish occasion and the snacking occasion. And so I think that's great. I will tell you then when we do, as a clinician, you look at data and you say, okay, is that significant or not? Is it clinically relevant or not? And I'm going to say any uptick in the area of fruit is relevant because the numbers are what they are. Yet there's only, we're only seeing, let's say, 2 more fruit as a snack consumed per year. Okay. So what that lets us know is, hey, we might be breaking through there. There's something there. Now, how do we really activate on it and really try to drive those numbers up? Vegetables, I mentioned a significant decline, double-digit decline, in fact. So while we made up, let's say, some consumption numbers in the area of fruit, we saw, unfortunately, we weren't able to overcome the decline with those numbers because they're double digits now. So, for example, vegetables, we saw, and it's important to note that this data was pre-pandemic, and this was purposeful on the industry's behalf. They chose to continue with this data. They had to make this decision actually almost like 1 year to the date ago. And they said, we know this is likely going to change things. We don't know to what extent, but we do know that we want to capture trended information. So pre-pandemic, what was a real bright spot for vegetables?
What?
Food service. Service. And so people actually venturing out, and it wasn't all just French fries. There was great
restaurants dishes. Single-handedly turned Brussels sprouts around.
Got it. Yeah, for real. And so it concerns me, right, that in this post-pandemic and or concurrent pandemic situation is that maybe we lost some of that. Let's take salad bars. That's another one. Every lunch on Monday, I would go do this, or the salad bars to schools program, for example. I mean, this is significant. So now we have to innovate further to figure out how we're going to make some of that up. So I think it's an opportunity, though, too, for retail to step in and try to help consumers now that maybe they were at least at one point more interested in cooking and trying new things. Is how do we kind of recreate some of those favorite vegetable dish items, let's say at home, and or gosh, we're all excited to get back to some away from home dining opportunities now. So, but vegetables was seeing a great uptick from the food service community. I would say juice, I mentioned that one had seen a significant decline. Yeah. And that was a decline in all the age groups. So,
which seems wild because I feel like the juice section in the produce department continues to get bigger.
It does. We just did a webinar on kombucha, and I know people are like, why are we doing that? Well,
because it's one of the fastest growing categories in food and beverage. Yeah.
Of the fresh produce department too.
Yeah.
And so, but that, that what didn't really exist. And now there's at least, let's say, maybe 8 to 10 feet dedicated to it. So right. I think, I think the fresh juice category, though, there's some really interesting trends, let's say, in other areas, like in the university segment. So I think, these trends are kind of interesting. I will say, remember I mentioned there was also, we did something new this year and we said, what about high frequency consumers versus, let's say, those who are like struggling and the light consumers. And so these are like, I don't know, the top shelf of consumers, the have a plant followers, the ones that are like totally crushing it with fruits and vegetables at every single meal occasion and snack occasion. And what we find, I think this is instructive for a lot of our produce marketers, or even if we're just talking to our friends, is because the high frequency consumers are eating fruits and vegetables so much, they are actually really open and interested to new recipes. And I think what you don't see on the surface, you see like, yeah, I want new recipes. But what you don't see on the surface is actually most of our low frequency and medium frequency consumers, they're dependent for away from home food for their fruits and vegetables, and they are less likely interested in those recipes. So maybe we're overdoing it with the recipes for some types of consumers, or maybe they need to be different types of recipes, i.e. more assembly style.
Keep it simple, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think you hit on one more thing before we get to your keep it simple, because that's really the crux of a lot of this is interestingly too, we see that high frequency consumers are also less influenced by what their children say they want when it comes to
interesting. Okay.
And so particularly for the produce moms, I thought we should bring that one up. And so coupled with that, we also see a decrease in vegetable consumption around millennials and Gen Zs. And those are our younger parents. And then we see that same trend reflected in our 1 to 8 year olds, for example. And so that's concerning. It should be concerning for the produce industry, or even, for example, like myself, a registered dietitian. When I was becoming a clinician, there were some very significant voices in this space that were really imparting great advice. And these they made their whole career out of being a child feeding expert. And the idea that mom and dad serve, they get to pick the what, and the kids get to pick the how much, and tasting and exposure are essentially not just a one-time, weekend warrior type of sport. They're like an everyday thing. And it's okay to not like something and even not like it a second time, maybe even a 16th time. That was, but so it really does seem that some of our young parents may not be imparting some of these healthy habits into their family time, which then might mean that a whole generation of consumers may end up being shortchanged, not because the parents don't want the best for them, but because you mentioned it earlier, it may not feel easy enough.
Got it. Yep. And I think that is absolutely the golden rule of inspiring people. You got to keep it simple. And really, nutrition, it can be super simplified as well. Like if we just really approach it as let's eat more fruits and vegetables, that is a great way to simplify nutrition and wellness goals.
Oh yeah. As part of our outreach for this research is we did some pitches to various well-known journalists. And one of them from the Washington Post, Tamar Haspel, tweeted about this. And I thought what she said was brilliant, which is, as someone who's been in food and nutrition for a long time, it's like, okay, here's these really dismal consumption numbers. So let's keep talking about fat, sugar, and salt, in a kind of, smart way, like she would say. But you're right. If fruits and vegetables are the plants that no one's eating enough of, and the plants that no one is eating enough of, study after study after study. So we really, and that means too for PBH, right? I mean, we need to self-reflect and see how we might do some things different. So as you know, the Have a Plant movement, and thanks for mentioning it's award-winning. It's received several awards now, which we're thrilled about. It really did. It's not only rooted in food and nutrition science, but also in behavioral science. And so everything we do, we really try to have that lens through, by which we look at it is through this idea of making it easy and a stages type of approach to behavior change, one that's focused on people still want to know like facts and figures. They just don't want to be told again and again and again and again, they need to eat more of these things that they know they already should do, so it makes it feel worse. But facts, figures, the kinds of information that you're sharing, for example, with your audience, this is still really important. Connecting emotionally to food is something that happens whether it's fruits or vegetables or anything else that's maybe competing for stomach share. And so experience is kind of it's more than just the healthfulness of the fruits and vegetables themselves, although people have a more heightened awareness of that right now. It's also the taste and the enjoyment and then the full experience or complement that particular product provides. And so that's an exciting, I think, opportunity as a marketer. And to leverage emotions, essentially the stuff of life, the thing that makes us human, the human condition, to appeal to lots of different types of consumers in lots of different types of situations. And that is what will be needed to increase these fruit and vegetable consumption numbers. New reasons, new behaviors, new experiences that consumers, if pleasurable, will want to repeat. And that gets to the doing part of this. So we have this KNOW, feel, do framework. And the doing, once I can tap into the immediate emotion as well as cultivate enjoyment and therefore longing or craving and that's what food service did for Brussels sprouts.
For sure.
Is then I can repeat that particular behavior. Right. And repeating it in the same context makes it automatic. And if it's automatic, this means new behaviors that are repeatable for consumers, they're pleasurable for the consumers, and for marketeers and or the produce industry, repeat purchase, which would be great. So all of us play a role in this know, feel, do approach that then hopefully makes the conscious behavior the automatic one.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think it really is all about the emotional side with food. It's like, how does this, people eat because of their environment or because of a culture, like on birthdays, we eat cake, you know what I mean? Stuff like that. Like we have to be more deliberate. And this is where a huge responsibility falls on the shoulder of, women like us, Wendy, anyone who is a member or a, part of the Have a Plant movement. this is what it's all about. We have to figure out how to weave fruits and vegetables into every corner of our lives, the way that we have woven in other types of food and beverage. And I absolutely believe that it is all about the inspiration, and storytelling will get us there. Simple inspirational recipes and how-to tips will get us there. I think too, I mean, as we do look ahead to what 2021 will hold for households, and I mean, I think there remains a ton of uncertainty. There's a lot of people who are displaced with their jobs and careers, and households are going to you're going to see households be probably a little bit more frugal with how they spend their money in the grocery store. And fruits and vegetables, I wholeheartedly believe they are among the most affordable choices in the whole produce department. I mean, I think I will go as far as to say they're even the most affordable. But I think we run into a huge barrier because so many households they buy more than what they use. So there's a lot of waste. And then it creates this mirage of like, wow, they're extremely expensive. So that's another, we're going to do what we can to debunk that at the Produce Moms. And I also think that, initiatives and movements like Have a Plant are another great place for you to really understand how accessible and fun fruits and vegetables are.
Yeah. I wanted to bring one thing up because I think the research speaks to it, but then also it's behaviorally science sound as well. And so one of the things that we're really focused on right now in a lot of our content and just imparting the insights from the research is really, and this is like but fruits and veggies first. And so from a research perspective, from the State of the Plate consumption data is when we look at the various meal occasions. Okay. So any appetizer, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack. Okay. Is, the appetizer, or what consumers would classify as an appetizer, it's like razor thin, the little data bar there for fruits and vegetables. Right. And so there's something really great about this idea. And even if we look at behavioral science, is we see that, for example, if children are fed fruits and vegetables first before the main meal, they increase their consumption. And so if we take and then that's good for nutrition. But if we take that complement together and we say, there's a whole campaign, a whole category, a whole positioning of fruits and veggies first for any product, any planning initiative. And maybe if we ate it first, maybe we wouldn't even waste it. Do you know what I mean? Because we're thinking about it. So I think that's something that and it's easy to tie into. You've done a lot of these beautiful boards, for example, just having it available. If I thought about even just so logically or straightforward, can I see this first? So if I see it first, then I need to purchase it first. If I see it, and all the way back, right? So if I serve it first, it will be eaten first. All this stuff about first, and also first foods, for example, this is all really, really, I think if I just allowed myself to simmer, if you will, on that one insight. The other one is about this a little bit of planning. So I will tell you, this is the harder part for, let's say, people that get overwhelmed with this idea of planning is that I think how to make that easy is most of the people who are very successful with eating the most fruits and vegetables, they do have an ability to plan and or desire and or execute on that. I should say most people have a desire to plan. But even if people didn't plan their meals, they just planned on what fruit or vegetable am I going to serve first. That would go a long way. It also keeps little kids' hands busy while you're trying to do 50 million things at the witching hour. Yeah. The other one, I think, for the industry and for consumers too, is about making it easy. And so you mentioned that too. It's a critical behavioral science principle. If you want to do something, you have people to do something, you need to make it easy. And easy doesn't just mean like a quick and easy recipe where I actually have to use a pan. It could be a quick and easy assembly, a recipe, right? So really challenging our view of easy. Anything from merchandising produce to packaging of produce, to positioning of it in the digital and online space, to positioning it in terms of a whole collective content strategy, and or connecting it to other foods that people are eating together. That's another new thing in this research this year, is really looking at pairings and saying where, for example, cereal is the number one, both cold and dry, the number one breakfast food that people eat with fruit. That's kind of like, oh yeah, makes sense. Mm-hmm. But why wouldn't we like just try to remind people to like do that? Because it's actually pretty simple to do. And it's typically repeatable and it's pleasurable. And it doesn't require a lot.
It's like it's hitting all of those emotional triggers, all those buttons that make it a great choice for food, for sure.
And it's an underutilized opportunity. I think it's like maybe a little over 10% of the time that people eat cereal, they're eating it with fruit. But it's the highest pairing. So that lets us know like, oh man, there's a lot more ways.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm realizing that I need to do a better job of that in my household. I mean, Joe and Mac love cereal, and very rarely do I serve it with fruit on it. So I'm part of that opportunity class for sure. So now, Wendy, where do we go from here? I mean, we obviously know that there's a huge opportunity. There's a negative trend that none of us like, whether you're in the industry, whether you're a consumer, no one likes to see decline. Everyone wants to strive for progress. So what's next with PBH, and how is the produce industry going to use this research as we move forward?
Yeah, I think you everybody take a deep breath. It's going to be okay. But we need to see this in this research, right? To kind of then be able to self-reflect, to then determine what does it mean for all of us. And so like very immediately, and it's going to be something different, right? For everybody. So immediately PBH is applying the no feel do framework by, of course we're sharing this data with you and other really important stakeholders too. But for us at PBH, through our digital and social channels, for example, we're leveraging the stickiness of well-known by some, but well-known song lyrics. And trying to get the stickiness of song lyrics to connect to fruits and vegetables, and then use that in our digital and social space with consumers to get them to be thinking about having an enjoyable experience essentially with fruits and vegetables by the fact that they're enjoying a similar tune and a play on words. So that seems like, oh gosh, that's like super far-fetched from what you just told me. Yes, it is, but it's a starting point, and it's what's appropriate for us. So we're going to continue to unpack this research and really delve into, what does this mean for retail? What does this mean for food service? What does this mean now in the context of the additional data that we've been accumulating over the course of the pandemic? And let's dig in a little bit deeper when it comes to, remember I said the differences and similarities, let's say, among the high frequency, medium frequency, and low frequency consumer. And then we're going to do some more research. And we're going to do research specific on maybe some of the easiest behavioral levers to pull to try to get an uptick in consumption. So we've now have a newly formed scientific advisory council that is really going to pour into us and our networks and our members, and some of these people are like really super smart about behavioral science and written books and are at great academic institutions. And so they're going to be really looking alongside for the first time with food and nutrition scientists and really help us formulate those research questions and do a little bit more research still this year to be able to then to share outwardly. We're also looking to form a multi-sector consumption coalition, because I always say this, this is consumer behavior is like super complex. And if like PBH or Produce Moms or another group had all the answers, we would be able to do this. And I think we have a really important role to play in our sphere of influence. There are other important spheres for which fruit and vegetable consumption could be very positively effectuated. And that could be in the public health sector, the policy sector, the retail sectors we mentioned, the food service sector. And so there are other organizations, other leading voices that need to be a part of that coalition to then elevate this to a national priority, kind of like what Tamar Haspel was saying, from the Washington Post. Like, okay, what should we really be focused on when it comes to food and nutrition policy in our country?
Fruits and veggies.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, it really is that simple.
And what if we could get more of those voices coming to the cause, if you will? And then we think it's important to recognize innovation, because, and I think that's innovation that applies the most, the impressive either technology, educational approaches, et cetera, to solving some of these sector issues. But then when you bring multiple sectors together, you realize, wow, the public health sector could be greatly advantaged by having relationships with the distribution community, for example. Right. And so there lies some great thought leadership conversations that PBH, along with everybody, including you, Lori, would be really happy to convene and to really not just elevate this as a national priority, but say, let's get after this. Seriously, is this going on a little too long? What can we do? And so if we take a deep breath and we look at the data and we decide what it means for us today, I think that's one thing. We look to additional data that builds on these findings and or experiences and what we've been able to learn in this pandemic, which absolutely has disrupted consumer and supply chain behavior. And so there's some really great learnings there too. And then we bring those really important sectors and or thought leaders and voices together and say, if we were going to make this a national priority and or have a national action plan that recognizes the best of every sector, yet also recognizes the opportunity to really push things forward and get after this, what would that look like? And so that's what's next.
I love that. Well, Wendy, this has been great to catch up with you, and congrats on concluding another State of the Plate research. And thanks for spearheading that. It certainly helps everyone, to know where things stand. You have to have that kind of data to make the right type of decisions to, inspire people and seize all of these opportunities that are facing our industry. Fruits and vegetables have never been more relevant in society. Right. Never. So it is extremely exciting times. And you have my full support. We look forward to continuing to support the Have a Plant movement and contributing to its ongoing success, and certainly any support that we can lend to help with this inspirational side of, getting fruits and vegetables into every nook and cranny of our lives. So I look forward to all of our ongoing partnership. And with that, Wendy, you get the final word, the last goodbye, and sign off the show.
Well, thanks, Lori, and thanks for everything you do. We always say, here's the plan, have a plant. It's your invitation to really inspire more with health and happiness. And so thanks for everything you do at the Produce Moms. Thanks for having us on. And as you said in the very top of this episode, let's do it again soon.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Produce Moms podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a featured guest, just send an email to lori@theproducemoms.com. We know there is a produce mom in you because there's a produce mom in all of us. Join our community on Facebook and all social platforms. Help us change the way America eats. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.